What made you quit a job on the spot? Story 1. My grandfather, who I considered like a father, passed away after a long stay in the hospital. We were closer than he was with his own kids, and our bond was quite special. I spoke to my manager about getting the day off for his funeral since I was organizing part of the arrangements, and having a day or two of bereavement leave, and he agreed. The day of the funeral, family comes and the staff start calling me, leaving me messages asking why I'm not at my shift, and telling me while I'm in a suit hosting family members at the funeral home that I have to find someone to replace me or face repercussions. Needless to say, I told them to figure it out and never looked back. Story 2. Walked into the interview, everything went well, and accepted the job offer. Went to the front desk to do the paperwork and noticed that the contract had a different pay amount and that I would be interning for the first month for $100 a week. I asked first about the amount difference, was told, oh, well, this is the standard contract. It just hadn't been updated for your specific offer. I told them that they need to edit and initial the changes before I would sign. Oh, well, that's not how things are done here. I thanked them for their time and left without signing anything. They called me back on the day that I was supposed to have started, asking where I was. I told them that because, hey, I never signed the contract, I was never an employee. Oh boy, that was a fun call. I guess they thought $100 a week would be enough to buy your soul. They were wrong. Well, at least they saved you from working for a company that still doesn't believe in contract revisions. Congratulations on dodging a bullet disguised as a job offer. Story 3. Worked for a privately owned bakery for exactly 1 week. The owner's son comes in, walks past the counter and into the bathroom. He comes out a few minutes later without acknowledging me or my coworker, gets into his car, and drives away. We both look at each other, then open the door only to find this guy literally crap all over the toilet seat and the toilet paper holder. I called the owner, told her what happened, and she said to deal with it. So I asked my coworker if she wanted to clean it up because I wasn't going to. She declined, and I told her I was walking out, and she did as well. We locked up the store and told the owner we quit but would reconsider staying if her son came back up to clean his own mess. She yelled and berated us for 20 seconds before I said goodbye and hung up. Story 4. Not me, but a middle-aged tradesman where I work. I work underground and it isn't for everybody. Terrible environment and whatnot. And this particular individual started working and after a few weeks decided it wasn't for him. Bad conditions and hostile supervisor. He approached the boss at the morning meeting and told him he wasn't going underground and that he was quitting. The boss told him that he had to give him 2 weeks' notice, and without missing a beat, the guy replied, "For the next 2 weeks, you're going to notice that I'm not here." Turned around, packed his stuff, and left. Was never heard from again. Story 5. I worked for a T-Mobile store, an authorized reseller, not an actual dealer. And 1 week I had an amazing week. Sold 55 phones, brand new activations on a business account, with 55 high-end phones at that time. When I got my next check, they said my paperwork was not in order and thus they couldn't pay me. As a side note, they always told us to make copies of all paperwork in case this happens so that you can show it to the manager and get it resolved within a day. I went over my backup paperwork with my boss, and he said everything looked to be in order and that he would have the office cut me a check. I went to the office and they told me that it was still not in order. I immediately gave them my store key and quit on the spot. I did go through collections and they did settle before I took them to court. The company did go out of business after a few years because they tried that with many other employees and eventually it led to an investigation by the government, according to an old coworker I bumped into years later. When you finally get that big check after a week of hard work, but it bounces harder than a basketball, that's when you realize your employer is more like a scam artist than a legitimate business. Sorry, your paperwork isn't in order is kind of like the adult version of the dog ate my homework. Story 6. Worked as a cashier in a local shop, and one night 2 guys came at me with knives trying to get into the till. I just walked away and said, have at it, as it wasn't worth the minimum wage to get into it with a couple of guys waving knives at me. After they ran out of the store, I picked up my mobile and called the police and called the store manager. The next day, the district manager meets me as I turn up for my shift the very next day. Her first words were that it was very unprofessional of me to be on my phone while at work. I laughed at her and told her that she could take this as my notice and walked out. I never had a problem with being held up, but the sheer gall of that just got me. Story 7. I worked at McDonald's when I was 16. We used to get a free McDouble or hot and spicy with small fries and a drink for our lunch break. One day when I went on break, the franchise owner was there, and when he noticed I asked for cheese on the hot and spicy, he attempted to make me pay for the whole meal because cheese wasn't free. I thought he was joking, so I laughed and started walking towards the break room until he yelled at me not to walk away from him in front of customers and my coworkers. I couldn't believe it. This grown-ass successful businessman was hounding me at 16 years old for a slice of cheese. Told him I wasn't going to pay, put the food down, and I walked out. They tried calling me to come to work that weekend, and I told them no thanks and never went back. Story 8. I had an inside hint from HR that there was about to be mass layoffs and my name was on the list. I scheduled my week-long vacation and returned the day before layoffs were presumed to have happened. My boss reamed me out for daring to take a vacation. She said that I would never advance in the company if I chose such a formative time in the project to take a vacation. She told me I would never be an executive producer if I went on a vacation before project launch, even though I wouldn't be able to touch it for a week I was away anyways, and that I would always be known in the television industry as lazy. I chilled, took my vacation, and returned. She was mad and said that she was upset with me for having left and made her take care of my project for me. Chewed me out in front of the entire company in the conference room. I chilled and was like, "Aren't you laying off a bunch of us tomorrow? I'm just waiting for you to fire me so that I can collect unemployment." Entire room literally starts panicking, and management tries to understand how the heck I knew about the layoff. It was one of my true Regina George chaos-causing moments in my life. Well, you know what they say. When the going gets tough, the tough go on vacation. And at least you got to relax and enjoy your vacation before being laid off. Your boss should try it sometime. I guess your boss never heard of work-life balance and probably thinks that employees should work 24/7 even during their vacation. Story 9. I am a physician assistant and took a job at an urgent care. After working there for about a month, I noticed some irregularities, such as some medications being expired and sometimes a lack of supplies. I wrote that off as the office manager not being as astute as she should have been and brought it up to the doctor who owned the place. He said that he would talk to her and straighten it out. And then one of the medical assistants came to me and said, "You know that this has been going on forever, right?" She then said that things would never change and to get used to it because the expired medications had been on the shelf for months and they were told to never throw them out. She then also told me that the autoclave, which is the machine that sterilizes instruments, was broken and all they did was wash the instruments in soap and water and put them in the autoclave anyway to get them as clean as possible. That was the end of that. I made out a formal complaint to the state medical board and never showed up again. The state actually came in the very next day and raided the place. They shut him down immediately. They found so many things wrong that not only did they keep the place out of business, they suspended his license. He was also prosecuted on federal charges because he was running a scam for truck drivers' physical exams. Story 10. Worked for a restaurant/pub, and the owner would come in with his buddies for hours at a time, a lot of times forcing the bartender to stay way past closing time serving them. Now, obviously, I was told not to charge anything because it's the owner's party. After hours of drinks on the house and no tip, not even from the owner, this started to happen frequently. Usually, we would put up with it if they would leave or be done before close. And then we started hearing that the kitchen staff hadn't been paid in a month. Bartenders were being paid because we made like $4 an hour, but the kitchen wasn't a tipped kitchen and made a decent wage. Turns out that the owner was a total drunkwit, which would have been obvious, and buried himself in debt. A week later, we were told that our checks weren't coming there on the day that they were supposed to, and then 2 days later, there still were no checks. I told them, hey, if my check wasn't here tomorrow, I will not come in for my shift. They said that it came in. I got there and then they said, well, what I meant was it's actually on the way. I talked to the blah, 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 and I walked out. I later found out that no checks were ever issued there again. They tried to pay some people cash, but it fell apart very soon after. Story 11. I worked for an attorney, and I was 7 months pregnant. I was supposed to be a secretary, but instead I was constantly being sent out as a process server. In July, at the end of my 3 months, August, I was supposed to get a raise, and she said that she couldn't give me a raise. The day that she said that, I left for lunch and never went back. She was an awful person, and the guy that I replaced told me that he felt sorry for me on my first day as he was leaving. I should have left that day too. Story 12. I worked at Walmart for a short time. I worked as hard as I possibly could to unload their pallets of merchandise. I always thought that I was so damn fast, and I studied the process, and I believed that I perfected it. Every single day, my manager came up to me and told me I needed to be faster. So I did, and the fast pace made me lose a little focus, causing me to break a finger. I let management know that I might be a little slower due to my injury, and they straight up told me that we won't tolerate any laziness, and wrote me up when I didn't meet their ridiculous standards. So I went home after my shift and never returned. Never called, never formally quit, I just never came back. Screw Walmart. Yeah, I guess Walmart wasn't ready for your lightning fast unloading skills, but hey, breaking a finger just to prove a point? That's some real dedication to the job. Too bad they couldn't appreciate your hard work and instead chose to write you up for being injured. Don't worry, I'm sure you'll find a better employer who values their employees, and maybe that one won't make you feel like you're in a race to the death to unload pallets. Story 13. I was at a company for about a year and a half as an assistant project manager. In that year and a half, I had 3 different bosses, the newest one being a heavy micromanager. I was getting paid about 20% below the standard salary for the position, overworked without any additional compensation, and the overall culture of the company was just flawed. My boss started nitpicking my work at the end of the day, and I told her I had plenty of time to get it done before the end of the day, but she kept pushing and escalating. She was borderline screaming, and I just cut her off and said, "I'm not doing this anymore, I quit." She yelled back, "Well, I need it in writing." And I said back with the straightest face, "I don't have to do it in writing," and I quietly packed up my stuff, said goodbye to my coworkers, and left. A year later, after working a couple other jobs, I accepted a project manager position with a competing company and made almost twice as much as I was making at the previous. Story 14. Fun times working at a grocery store when I was a teenager. I was still out on my own, but working anything that I could to make ends meet. I guess I didn't work hard enough being the one-man crew in front of a store manager who decided to tell me to go faster, which was impossible, and do even better for my $4.25 pay. I try explaining that I was going as fast as personally possible when he decided to say, "Well, you'll do what you are told, as fast as you're told if you want to keep this job. You should be so lucky." Decided right then and there, bro, I'd rather starve than work for some stupid jerk whose high point in life is the assistant manager at a buy-low grocery store. Quit on the spot. Story 15. Had a job about 10 years ago doing tech support for an ISP for a week. The pay was minimum wage plus bonuses you earned for selling people stuff. And by stuff, I mean terrible, overpriced services that you can get online for free. I was still in the phase of training where I had a supervisor listening in on my calls, and after a call, he told me that I should have paused and tried to sell more crappy antivirus services before I fixed his problem. Handed in my headset right there. Feels so skeevy when people call you to help and then you have to turn into a telemarketer. Let's just say that trying to peddle overpriced subpar services to unsuspecting customers wasn't exactly what he had in mind when you signed up for a tech support gig. I mean, I get it. I'm happy to help people fix their problems and issues, but I kind of draw the line at turning into a sleazy salesman. Story 16. Worked at a restaurant as a server. We had just catered a large wedding reception, and the owner's wife was chatting with the wedding party at night and occasionally getting drinks. At the end of the night, she said that she's taking her share of the tips since she helps so much. I say fine, even though that's illegal in our state. An hour and a half after the party ends, the restaurant is still a mess, and the owner's wife is just standing around talking while I was supposed to be cleaning up. It was almost midnight, and I worked my other job earlier that day, so I walked out without saying a word. They ended up giving me all of my tips on my last check. Story 17. The boss wanted my team to work extra shifts without weekends to finish a project's next milestone, so that we can show the client that we are capable of finishing before the due date. We worked 14 hours a day for 4 weeks with no weekends, and the last 2 days we worked for 36 hours straight with no breaks since the due date was 1 day away. Everyone was wiped and on the edge. No smiles, no small talk, nothing. And we don't get paid overtime. After finishing the milestone, he thanked us and called us in for a meeting, saying that we have to continue working like this for an unknown period until they hire new staff members. I refused with another colleague and said we will work for what we get paid for, which is 9 hours per day, 5 days a week. He didn't take us seriously, but we didn't give a crap at that moment. We worked the next 2 weeks accordingly, and he called us and said that he was extremely disappointed that we don't value the company. I walked out, collected my stuff, handed in my resignation letter to the HR, and said bye. Story 18. I worked at a certain children's entertainment place known for having birthday parties with pizza and a rat mascot. I was a party hostess. A little boy, probably 7 or so, took a really long time to blow out his candles, so I leaned in, and he was making his wish for the guy to stop touching him. I immediately went to my manager with it, and he told me that I couldn't do anything with this information. At the time that I wanted to discuss it with the mother, so I quit on the spot and reported it to the police. I have no idea if anything came of it. Story 19. Going to the toilet pre-meeting to negotiate a raise, I heard both directors of the company, which was a small firm and everything ran through them, talking outside the window that they were going to flat out refuse any offers and make the a-hole work overtime to prove his loyalty, and that he has no prospects anyway. Where will he go? So I entered the meeting with my signed and printed resignation letter in hand, slapped it on the table after sitting down, and stood straight back up after saying, "Meeting over." I now work for a successful company, part of a brilliant team of 10 people, amazing pension, terrific bonuses, and obtainable progression with a great work-life balance. Half days every single Friday till I die also. If you're being mistreated at a job, overworked, underpaid, whatever it may be, get your affairs in order and walk. Well, that's what I call a resignation with style. It's always satisfying to see someone take control of their own career and show their employers who's really in charge. Plus, now he gets to enjoy those half Fridays for the rest of his life. Talk about a great trade-off. Story 20. I was already having a bad day. My transfer request was denied. My supervisors were on me like they owned it. Nearing my lunch break, I was stopped by a customer asking for a price check. Me, not being able to do a price check, said, "Please take it to the front. They can help you there." Wasn't good enough. The customer proceeds to berate me, almost making me cry, and finally she says, "How about you just go kill yourself?" Like, what? Knowing that management wouldn't do anything, I just left. Screw that. Being abused for minimum wage? Yeah, not worth it. Story 21. I was working at one of those stands that sells fresh frozen ice cream droplets. You know the ones. It was at an amusement park. At one point, it's a hot summer day, and I'm standing in the sun in front of my negative 40-degree freezer, simultaneously burning and freezing at the same time. I have a long line of customers because I was near the exit to a stunt show featuring a particular superhero that is a knight of the darkness. I scoop some ice cream balls in the plastic tray, slide my scoop over the top to knock off the excess ice cream quickly, and then hand it to the customer in exchange for their money. A wild manager appears. Suddenly, a manager tells me that I didn't level off the ice cream correctly. He takes the scoop and small bowl from my hands and levels it off just like I had done for the previous customer. He then dumps it back into the freezer and makes me do it again while standing over my shoulder. Mind you, I still have a long line of customers. So I do it again, and this time he is not pleased and berates me some and makes me dump it out do it again. So I do literally the same thing a third time. And this time he's somehow fine with it and wanders off to annoy another teenager making minimum wage. So now I'm actually confused as to what I was doing wrong and have a line of customers staring at me, leaving me thoroughly embarrassed. I then proceed to overfill every container and hand them out to each customer while not taking any money from them. Then I simply walked out to my car and drove home. I never turned off or secured my register. I never formally quit. I never said a word to anyone. I just walked away. If I was doing something wrong, then fine. But there is no time where it's appropriate to scold and reprimand an employee in front of customers, and I haven't been back to that amusement park as an employee or customer since. Sounds like that manager was having a meltdown over some ice cream. So good for our hero for not giving a cold scoop and walking out. Let's hope that manager learned a lesson about how to treat employees and maybe even learned how to level off ice cream properly.